What's up, team? Sean for Us to Live. And today we're going to answer the question, what is going on at Block, formerly known as Square, current symbol is SQ. We've had some pretty rough pressure on the price. We've had some somewhat mixed reviews on the earnings. We're facing major competition within this company across a number of areas. But I have a guess that you may not really know what Block actually is and the reason Square changed its name to Block. And Block represents a lot more than you might think. So I want to share some of these things, but before I do, I want to call out a couple of key pieces here. So in a nutshell, what we know to be Block is really Square, right? Square is a payment system that allows, vendors and businesses to take payments. There's also Cash App. There's also Spiral and Tidal and TBD. So you may not be aware of all these other components, but I think it's important we understand what's in here and what's inside of the stock. Now, look, before we do anything, I want to call this out. I am a shareholder. I own actually quite a bit of Square stock, and I do continuously add to it. This is not meant to be read as financial advice, and certainly I don't suggest anyone jump into this thing because where it's at right now is very volatile. I happen to be in a position where I'm hedged pretty well, so I don't mind taking on the additional risk because I am protected on the downside. So I was calling that out, that if you're not in this video is not a recommendation that you should be. It's also not a recommendation that you shouldn't be. It's about you doing your own research and giving you a little bit extra to think about. So I want to touch first on the most recent earnings because I think it's really important that we level set on where things are today before we go a little bit deeper into what the company is. And I'll be honest with you, before we even start, I just want to say I am a bit concerned on how much they're trying to do, the level of competition they face against all the categories of what they're trying to do, and whether or not Jack has the focus to really get this thing to where it needs to be, because we've got him having left Twitter to focus on Block, and Block still doesn't seem to be doing great. So I just want to understand where we are and where we're going to go. So in a nutshell, here's the deal. Excuse me. We have seen and continue just this past day to see stock in Square continuing to go down, right? They reported their June quarter earnings and revenue that fell from a year earlier, but it did beat estimates, right? So it fell as two major financial metrics, operating profit and gross payment volume, did miss views overall. So I want to call that out. That's sort of not a great thing. And a Wedbush analyst, Moshe Katri, actually most recently said it's the second consecutive quarter missing on gross profit as well as gross payment volume. And this likely reflects Square's end market consumer merchant profile, which is struggling. I want to explain what this means. If you are a payment processor, your gross payment volume is the total amount of money that's transacted at all the businesses. This is not what Block makes. This is not what Square itself brings in, okay? This is what all of their end customers are making. Now, coming out of COVID, coming into an economy that's still not where it should be, this isn't a huge surprise. So I was surprised a bit to see the impact it had on the stock, okay? Now, the other thing I want to call it is Square's overall earnings were 18 cents per share on an adjusted basis. Now, this is down 72% from the year earlier period. They had projected earnings of 16 cents a share, okay? So not bad. Although things are overall down, it's not bad, right? Square also noted that revenue dropped 6% to 4.4 billion. And this is because, as they called it out, Cash App transactions for digital cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, of course, had fallen big time. However, again, although this doesn't sound great, the prediction was for 4.33. So coming in at 4.4, although down, was still better than people expected. So here's really the meat and potatoes of the earnings, right? Across the board, financial analysts really had this idea that operating profit is a key metric for Square, and operating profit came in at 1.47 billion. So this is actually up 29% against a target of 1.495. So we're a little bit low on that metric there. Again, I called this out already, but just to double down on it, gross payment volume, you might see this sometimes as GPV, from merchant customers rose 23% to 52.5 billion. But again, the estimate was actually 53.187 billion. So although we're seeing things sort of going in the right direction, we do at times miss some of the calls here. Now, the Cash App gross profit rose 29% to 705 million. This excludes, just to call it out, Afterpay, and the gross profit rose 15% as well. So overall, the reality of the situation is this, right? According to Block, their earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, also known as EBITDA, for those who aren't aware of it, came in at 187 million. Now, the analyst had actually called for revenue of 140 million. So again, pretty nice little beat here. The gross profit of 1.47 billion did miss by 20 million, according to Trevor Williams from Jefferies. But EBITDA beat by 50 million, even though there was a miss in Afterpay in certain segments. So kind of a mixed bag, right? Not bad, not great, not terrible. Sort of a whole, I don't know, a whole handy mess of things to look at here to understand. So the big thing we have to also call out here is that the Q2 results did miss on gross profit. This is according to Bank of America, but beat the street on EBITDA due to lower operating expenses. So again, we're beating on certain numbers, and our profits and operating profits are looking better. So not terrible. The reason I'm starting here is I just want to give everyone sort of a feel for like where we are, what we think is happening, what the most recent earnings were, before we sort of deep dive into where the company is today and what they're doing, and then my take on that as well. So a couple things I want to call out too is, overall, it has not been easy to be a shareholder of Block for some time, right? For about 2 years now, they've been in this sort of bit of turmoil where we've seen the price just continuously come down. And a lot of things that have been happening in 2022 in the first half anyways have only added to the risk and to the challenge that they have. So they're seeing significant revenue losses in the face of competition. They've got reduced customer spending. We've got issues on the digital currency side of the house. People aren't as into that. They're not making as many transactions. They're not investing at scale. But there's bright spots too, right? They are doing really well from the cash app perspective, and it is helping them sort of hit those metrics and those numbers they need. So coming out of Deutsche Bank, Brian Keene is predicting meaningful profitability for Block's second quarter of 2022, which, again, I'm going back in time here because I'm trying to draw a total picture for you, which we did see was pretty good. So that was a good call there, right? And overall, there is this sort of feeling of like, hey, look, if they get these things right, the second quarter is going to be a heck of a lot better. The main thing that has me worried, and again, I'm calling it out here, I own shares. I've been adding to my shares, but I still operate with a bit of fear. This is why I use things to protect my downside. The reality is Block is not Square. Square is a component of Block, and both Square and the larger Block component have a lot of competition from a lot of really, really big names, okay? And that's the part that sort of scares me the most, right? So we know in general they're facing competition from the likes of PayPal. They've got Shopify as a vendor processing. They've got Apple coming out with processing systems. So the ability for them to completely compete in that space is getting tougher and tougher. And they were really hoping on making a lot of money coming out of sort of the crypto space as well, which has slowed down considerably. So although Block is really the name when it comes to point of sale or POS systems and processing, there are a lot of other people who are coming in with very niche offerings, right? PayPal, of course, is everywhere, and they're attached to eBay, right? Shopify is making it easy to take and process everything directly from your own e-commerce stores. So people who are shopping there are not using Square in this case, right? We also know that there's even niche markets. I did a video on Toast the other day that's really focused on the restaurant niche. So everywhere they look, if they're not tight, if they're not expanding, if they're not making their offerings better, it's going to get worse and worse. And I think this is a big call out here to understand that even systems like Zettle are an alternative to what Square is trying to do as well, right? And it's also a question of, can they reduce their margins to try to stay in the game and outcompete? I think that's going to be a place that could put pressure on earnings as well. But it goes so much farther than just as a POS system, okay? You have to understand that they're up against companies like SoFi, an absolute monster in the space, right? Now, I'm going to call this out again for full transparency. I also have a very large position in SoFi, so I own both of them because I think the sector in itself will eventually be okay. But again, team, I really am protected on the downside, and if you're not, you need to be careful of that. The other problem is they went all in sort of in this idea that Bitcoin and crypto in general was going to be a huge thing and a huge component. Well, look, we know this has not gone well for them thus far. It is somewhat of a drag and is causing somewhat of a lag on the business. So they're facing a number of competitors in that space. Everything from your standard Coinbase to Robinhood offering it, to Webull offering it, to everyone else offering these platforms too, is yet another competitive front for them to face there too. So look, the reason why I mention all this is not because I'm negative. It probably sounds that way, but I'm actually not. The reason I mention all these things is because I think there's something to be said for this idea that with optimization and acquisition and a focus on different categories and key components of the business, they actually can do a lot more. So this brought me to their site. Okay, I'm going to leave it up here while I talk for a minute. And I just want to call this out that I really wasn't quite aware of all of the components that they're trying to build and trying to work through. So in just quickly coming here for a moment, aside from the fact that like I'm mesmerized by the block spinning on my screen here, I want to call it out that when I thought about Block, I was primarily and have always primarily been thinking about this idea of Square and Cash App. Those are two products that make sense to me. I understand what they do. I understand the value in the market. And I also understand that it feels like almost every store I go in, from a restaurant to a coffee shop to a convenience store, I do see Square pretty regularly. But what I also see is a lot of restaurants and online forums seem to have Toast. I also see that as I'm using my phone to pay for things, there's other payment providers on there that aren't Square. So the desire to go a little bit deeper here and understand what else is going on in the business was sort of surfaced by my own interest. And then a number of folks on comments on other videos have really said, hey, can you jump in a little bit more? Not just talking about earnings, but talking about competition across different components here. So that's what I want to do real quick. When you hit their website, what's really interesting is they've got this idea of, what is actually in the block. And the building block of Block is Square, Cash App, Spiral, Tidal, and what they're calling TBD. So I think it's particularly interesting here to call this out, that there is a lot going on and they are working a lot of things. My only fear before I jump into this again is we are facing competition seemingly across the board here. And there's a lot of focus on areas that are easy to compete in and areas that are very susceptible to downtrends if things don't get adopted. You'll see what I mean in a moment here. So the first thing I want to jump into is Square, of course, right? Square is a fairly simple idea. It's how we power our business, right? It's a point of sale solution. It's for taking payments and processing payments. Millions of companies use Square to manage payments, staff, and conduct businesses in store and online. That's what they're saying here. I think that's what we all know it for, right? Square's been around a long time. I actually have somewhere on my desk the old Square that plugs into the phone, so you can take credit cards from your cell phone. I think it's important to call it out that it is a seamless experience. It is very easy to use. It's everything from running commerce, point of sale, online stores, and payments, as well as customers. You can offer things like loyalty programs, email and SMS marketing, and even messaging as well. From a staffing perspective, right, we can manage benefits and overall management within the app as well. Sorry, I'm talking over myself here. And they even offer payroll solutions. For the banking side, this is really interesting as well. You can see how this is sounding more and more like a SoFi, or more and more like a complete and utter bank, frankly. Right? From the banking perspective, they want it to be just like a regular business banking account, checking, savings, loans, all these kind of things that you'd expect to see out of any bank. And the problem, though, is the more and more this starts to feel like a bank, the more and more I get concerned about margins and operating profit. So just, bear that in mind. I think traditional banks have their own huge problems, but for SoFi and Square to keep competing, you do have to wonder at what point are they doing all the same things and it's a race to the bottom. That's my big fear for both companies. Now, of course, they call it out here, right? They are not a niche provider. They do provide for the entire industry from a POS and an overall fintech service, right? Retail, food and beverage, ProServe, even large enterprise businesses is a good call out here. I don't think there's anything in here that's blowing anyone's mind. You're probably familiar with this, right? They've got their hardware system. This is a very typical model. You're going to buy the hardware and then you're going to pay ongoing for the services. This is typically a really good model that I like to invest in. It means that it's very sticky. Once you buy the hardware, or maybe they lease it, I'm not 100% sure on that. I'm pretty sure you buy it though, because I've bought it myself. You buy these sort of screens, these registers, these card readers, whatever the case might be. Now you own them. Now you run their services through them. The reason this is particularly interesting is that you have both a hardware and a software sort of program here, where they get the initial bang of the hard, sticky thing that sticks on the desk. And then every month you're going to pay for processing or payroll or access to banking or whatever the case might be. So it is a nice model with an ongoing revenue stream, which makes it very interesting. Oh, look at that. Of course, I could have simply scrolled down a tiny bit. So again, right, they're getting a little bit of an upfront payment, and then they're getting those services over time. So they've got hardware, they've got terminals, they've got the stand mounts. This is what happens when I don't scroll as fast as my brain is talking. But I'm just calling this out because this is what this is, right? I think we all know Square pretty well. We know what it does. It makes sense. It's pretty clear that the competition is stiff, but they're a very dominant player. Okay, works for me. Well, what do we know about Cash App? Right? Well, Cash App is not too different from what we know already, right? I'm going to read right off the screen, so don't hate me for it. The easy way to send, spend, bank, and invest. And clearly this is focused on the consumer side of the business, right? Square is for that business-to-business model where they're selling it to all types of businesses. Well, Cash App is on the other hand. Cash App is where they're letting consumers use their products. Now, I think that this is really cool as well because I can do a lot of things. I can do my investing. I can do my banking. I can send money to friends. But there's a lot of people who are doing this also. So the competition here again is going to come down to what do the margins look like and how do they make their money on the platform, right? So just to call it their sort of core pillars again, you can pay anyone instantly. Well, a lot of services already do that, right? I can connect debit cards 100% or use one of theirs, or as they call it out, design their own. I can do my general banking, get my direct deposits put here, use it as a checking and savings account, and as well as all the other platforms that exist too, I can invest here. So ironically, it sounds once again exactly like SoFi. It sounds exactly like what a lot of other vendors are doing. Now, I'll save my thoughts on the opportunity for a second here. I want to get to the end first. And again, right, we can pay our friends, we can invest, we can design, all the things we've already talked about. Cool. I think we get all this. Part of the problem here, though, in general, is that I think they were experiencing a lot of upticks overall from the crypto buying and from that space in general. The issue here is that's gone down. So have their ability to generate revenue on those trades too. So I just want to call that out. Now, as we go back here, we've covered Square and Cash App. The last piece of this is Spiral, not the last piece. Listen, Spiral is yet another piece. So Spiral was one I actually was not aware of, okay? So this is directly from their website, so this is not my words. Making Bitcoin more than investment. Bitcoin is the best money. It should be used like it. We build and fund free open source projects aimed at making Bitcoin the planet's preferred currency. So in many ways, when I think about what Spiral is, excuse me, this is really sort of a development play to bring people onto the ecosystem and probably to ultimately work with Cash App and Square. Okay, so this is not necessarily a product in theory, but it allows people to launch projects on their framework that exists. And that's sort of the idea, right? Lightning development, Bitcoin design, Bitcoin development. They're offering grants. They're offering lots of pretty cool things in here if you're into this space. The problem, though, as an investor, what if nothing happens here? What if Bitcoin, regardless of how much you love it or think it's the great thing, what if nothing does happen with it and we have all this money going towards it? We have all this investment being made into Spiral, a component of Block, but all it is a drag on the system. What if we never get monetization out of this? It's a genuine concern that I have. Now, this is the part that I think really I haven't heard anyone talk about, so I want to spend a little bit of time to talk about it. And again, not that I'm being a negative on them here, but I'm going to call it out. Tidal is yet another component. Tidal is a streaming service, as they call it, for all music fans, okay? I saw this a little bit earlier when I was starting to do my first initial pass at how I wanted to think about and talk about Block, and I was most surprised by all of this, right? If you're like me, you're probably looking at this thinking like, okay, like they've got the ability to listen from mobile, it's playlists, it's mixes and radio, it's innovative audio formats, it's 90 million plus songs, right? The problem here is, have we now entered competition with Siri, with Spotify, with YouTube, with companies like Audio, which is a new podcasting and listening system? I mean, there's so much competition here that it's almost like mind-boggling to think that this is another thing that Block is doing. They're tying music and streaming music into the platform or somehow as its own platform. This kind of concerned me a bit, right? Not to say that it doesn't look cool or isn't necessarily something people are going to be very interested in, but is this something that we really have a huge need for at this point when they're still facing so much competition in other areas? I guess for me, my problem is there's a feeling of like, are we simply trying to take on all of the biggest players but not be the best at any one thing? And that to me is a very big concern. On one hand, they have to compete with PayPal, Apple, and SoFi. On the other, they have to compete with Robinhood, Webull, SoFi again, all the traditional brokers and platforms, many banks who are offering payment solutions and debit cards. Then you've got Spiral, which is a development platform for Bitcoin-based work. And then we're now at Tidal, a streaming service for, we'll call it entertainment because it seems to be more than music. And I just wonder, like, is this really the direction we're going in? I don't even know how this fits into it. I get the idea of an all-in-one mobile solution, but this feels like a total disparate, unrelated system to anything else we've talked about so far. So I'm a little concerned here on what this means and what kind of, generative revenue or profits we're going to start seeing from this type of a service. Now, the last piece, which again, I wasn't even aware of, is what they're calling TBD. And this is essentially, again, per them, make the decentralized financial world accessible for everyone. right? Decentralized and trustless systems create a world that empowers individuals. Okay, cool. TBD's open source platform enables developers to build products and services on decentralized technologies. We believe an open source model will win in a decentralized, permissionless world. Okay, cool. So sounds very similar to what they're doing with Spiral. TBD's strategy: build open source protocols, collaborate with community, invest in the ecosystem. I got to tell you, like, it's not that this isn't a fun, cool idea, but I guess what I don't understand is what what kind of time and effort is being driven into this part of the business? Who's running it? What's the long-term vision to monetize this and drive something to the bottom line? And it feels to me like both TBD as well as Spiral are almost hedges in case Bitcoin takes off, in case decentralized finance takes off. It allows Square to quickly have something here and a platform or a marketplace of potential apps or solutions that can exist there. So it's not that I don't love the idea of hedging for the downside or hedging for the future. It's no problem there. What I'm wondering though is what is stopping anyone else from now being yet another 50 competitors they have to deal with here? What would happen if anyone else we've talked about decided they were going to start into this space? Or what happens if, the major banks of the world realize they're sitting on billions of dollars that they can leverage for this and go and start their own decentralized platforms and development opportunities? This isn't a point to say that they shouldn't do this. I just fail to see how these things are interconnected. Now, of course, you can make the argument, well, Sean, you're missing the boat here, right? Square can make sense because if we get to a point where we have DeFi, this will help to add more apps onto Square. And with Spiral, we'll have more of an ability to use the Lightning Web components, or rather, I'm sorry, the Lightning Network. Okay, it's a stretch. Maybe I get it. But then I see Spiral for streaming music. And I guess I wonder, is the play there to get people off of Spotify or off of YouTube? I'm not sure what the play is there. So then I start thinking to myself, okay, well, wait a minute. We know we've had obviously Twitter, which is mobile first. We've got Tidal, which apparently looks to be mobile first. We've got Cash App, which is mobile first. It would be my guess a lot of TBD and Spiral are both going to be sort of mobile first experiences. So is Square the workhorse, and is Cash App the workhorse that's driving towards something different within Block, something we're not aware of or don't really know the future of? I don't know. It's possible. But as an investor, it's very concerning for me, frankly, because I need to see that they can not only compete, but win in the Square space, and not only compete, but win in the Cash App space. And although both are generally doing very well, the earnings were not absolutely terrible. They were good in some regards. These other components have me sitting here thinking, like, what are we trying to get to here? What's the end game? And the one criticism I've had of Dorsey's style of management is I think that he does not necessarily focus on generative moves to get to profit and profitability. It's not to say they don't make money, they do. And the guy is clearly a genius. But Twitter now, after all these years, still isn't really making a lot of money for the amount of users a day on it. And it is a business and it is publicly traded. So there is a need to make sure that there is an ability to continue onward and generate profits there, or else at some point it's not going to go well. And I think that's what I get fearful of when I look at Square and how they've turned it into Block being all these other additional services. So look, I guess what I'm getting to here is that there's sort of this piece of me that thinks, is this just a fun project for Jack Dorsey and he wants to run another company and try to do some cool things with it? Hey, he's the CEO and investors can stay with him or leave him. For me, the problem is at some point I have to see a way to get into a place where I want to exit this, making a profit on it. And as I still feel like we can get there with the core banking and core personal banking solutions, the more of these offshoots into areas that are frankly not exactly exploding right now, it gets me more and more concerned over time. So that's sort of my take on this, right? It's a mixed bag of earnings, not good, not bad, somewhere in between. They're facing massive competition across the board. There seems to be an almost divergent take on what the future will be, because we know that they're buying companies like Afterpay, which makes sense with Square and Cash App. But then we see these development projects that are super heavy in the crypto and DeFi space, spaces that frankly have been blowing up lately, bankruptcies, schemes to take retail's money. And I'm not saying that's what's happening here, but there does seem to be this take of like, look, we're not exactly in a good place in the realm of crypto and DeFi. It's not to say we won't get there, but we're not really there or even close to being there. And with operating profits getting squeezed and with competition at every angle, yeah, I'm a little nervous about this one, right? If I wasn't protecting my downside and I didn't have hedges in there, I don't know that I would be holding Square right now. That's again just my take, and it's not meant to be financial advice. It's just meant to be my personal opinion on my own portfolio. So look, I talked for a long time. I wasn't sure how long the video was going to be. It went for longer than I meant. But in a nutshell, I think I'll leave you guys here. This is a classic do your own research. Understand the market direction, understand the competitive direction, understand the market advantage that they have, which at the moment is very good. And if those DeFi apps, if the Bitcoin development can somehow turn itself into key components that expand into new markets and new revenue, then hey, I'm all for it. But that little tiny bit of information we have on them here isn't really telling us a whole lot of anything. So I would just take all this into account in the way that you approach any of these modern companies to see what they're doing. The best way to think about this for me is I want to compare it directly against its peers. On the crypto side of the house, I'm going to look at a Coinbase as a comparison. On the personal banking side of it, I'm going to be looking at SoFi. On the payments side of it, I'm going to be looking at a whole bunch of people, frankly. But like, I just think that's going to be the route you have to take here. And that's my 2 cents on it. I also have the sun coming in my window and blinding me on the right-hand side. So hopefully it's not too bad on the camera. With all that said, I really appreciate it. And if you got to this point in the call, I'd love to know, are you in Square? Are you not in Square? Are you thinking about getting in? Are you running away from this thing? Let us know. Thanks again for watching. Really, really appreciate your time. Thanks, team. Have a good day.